I wanted to shift gears just slightly about this, and it does relate to what we're talking about with Steve Jobs, and now that he's no longer there. And I know you speak a lot and you've researched about culture driving business, and he's not at the helm anymore, and yet it seems to be doing all right. Can you talk a little bit about what you mean when you say culture drives business?
Well, I wouldn't say culture drives business. What I would say is that culture is your strategy execution engine. Yeah. And so I would never say that culture comes first. In fact, I think it's a problem if culture comes first because organizations then limit their strategic options. We've always done it this way. How could we possibly then, go after that? So really, I encourage leaders to define their strategy first, and then once those strategic aspirations have been defined, think clearly about the most important behaviors that are going to enable people to achieve those strategic objectives. And that's really what culture defines, is how are you going to prioritize behaviors in order to achieve these strategic objectives. The problem in most organizations is that they have at least some competing objectives, some competing strategic demand. For example, the demand to provide the highest quality products, but also to be efficient, right? Those are potentially competing demands because quality often requires munificence and spending and investment, and efficiency often requires being more frugal and cost-cutting and so forth. So really what culture does is, if defined effectively and if culture meets the three criteria I believe to be important, which I'll mention in a moment, then what you have is the ability to really address those close calls throughout the organization without people, again, having to come and ask every time, which way should I go on this? So let me talk a little bit about the three criteria for using culture as a leadership tool, which has really been the essence of my research and consulting effort. The three criteria are this. The first one we talked about. Culture needs to be strategically aligned. In other words, the behaviors that are most important are actually the ones that will get you full execution on your strategic imperatives. The second is the culture has to be strong. It can't just be something people talk about in vacuous terms. It can't just be printed on your coffee mug. It actually has to be something that people internalize and they're willing to act upon and take risks on behalf. And then the third criterion, which became massively clear to me in the past year or two when I published a trilogy of academic papers that tracked 60 of the largest high technology firms across a 6-year period, is that the culture has to be adaptable. Organizations won't grow, won't change, won't hit their financial results or whatever outcomes they're interested in unless they have a capacity to change that culture over time as external circumstances change.